Well, let me start by saying how happy I am to do this and how good it is to see you all and to work with you. This is really the first dialogue the Global Technopolitics Forum has done, and we're delighted to be doing it with Korea and about Korea as well. About myself, I am the chair of the Global Technopolitics Forum. You'll hear from my partner in crime, Dr. Padi Esfandari, soon. I'm now mostly at the University of Southern California. My last job in government was chairing the U.S. National Intelligence Council. The agenda for the session, basically the first session, we're going to talk mostly about the history and structure of internet governance. We've got terrific presentations. We have two presentations by European colleagues who, since this was the middle of the night, couldn't be with us, but we did pre-record them. So we'll do them first. They're both very distinguished with lots of experience, both as academics and as practitioners in the internet world, Wolfgang Kleinvector and Olivier Crepin-Leblanc. So we will do them as recorded presentations. And then in the second session, we'll talk much more about the instruments and of governance and geopolitics on the web. That's the game plan, and we'll try and have reserved time for some roundtable discussion at the end of both sessions. Next to you, Padi, and then want to hear from Dongman. Padi.
Thank you very much, Greg, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I want to welcome every one of you, and thank you for joining us. Today's event is an initiative of Global Technopolitics Forum, a nonprofit co-funded by Greg and I, with a mission to shape the public debate and facilitate global coordination at the intersection of technology and geopolitics. The event is part of a series of cyber governance dialogue we will be having around the world, and is aimed to inform the 20 group, which is a forum initiative that we will introduce later today in our presentation. And we are delighted to start this in South Korea. I want also to thank the Pacific Century Institute, a nonprofit organization that aims at building bridges between countries and people, for funding this project. I also want to thank the Korea Internet Governance Alliance's KIGA, especially to Dongman Lee for being such a gracious local host, for the true spirit of collaboration shown by such an esteemed institution and group of speakers. And on that note, over to you, Dongman.
Thank you. First of all, I really pass my highest gratitude to Greg and Perry, who initiated this effort, and also I believe today's meeting is a great opportunity for Korean internet community, governance community, to have the close connection with the not only inside Asia, but also through Europe and North America. And I hope this actually start our sharing of the internet governance experience with the other people all over the world. And again, I really appreciate both Greg and Perry to prepare this wonderful agenda, and I look forward to have a discussion and share knowledge throughout the next couple of hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And welcome to those who have just joined us. Professor Park, it's nice to see you, and we look forward to listening to you later. Many thanks. So what I propose to do is launch into the recording. They're both very interesting presentations. I'm sorry they're not here in person, but both of them have been associated with ICANN for a long time. They've also been associated with internet governance in various ways. If I did particularly Wolfgang's resume, it would take most of the rest of our time to recite. So not doing that, let us plunge in and start the recording.
Very much. Thank you for the invitation, and it's always a great time, even if we are unable to meet face to face, but to discuss this issues of the history and future of internet governance now in the virtual world. Hopefully, we can meet again soon in a face-to-face meeting. So I'm involved in this internet discussion since nearly half a century. And what I've seen in this nearly 50 years is we moved from crossroads to crossroads. So there was always difficult times. So it was never clear what will be the next move. And insofar, if I say today, in the year 2020, we are on the eve of another very dramatic development. So in a couple of years, probably we'll say, okay, this was just, another a wave. Anyhow, history will tell us whether this will be now a watershed or whether we will continue. I would not say as usual, but continue now with new experiences we will make just in facing these new realities. So looking backwards, I have structured the 50 plus years in the past into what I've called 6 waves. So if we remember, the internet started from a military challenge. It was the start of the Sputnik 1 in 1957, when the US military was thinking about, what to do to protect American homeland. And so they feared that the Soviets could attack the Americans via the outer space. And what would they attack? A military communication system. At this time, it was centralized. And so the idea in the 60s popped up to have a decentralized communication system, which cannot be easily destroyed by the enemy. So, this was a military research project. And then at the end of the 60s, when Soviets and the Americans reached some agreements on the SALT agreements and others, so this became now a big challenge for the young academic community which were involved in this military research. And while the political tensions moved a little bit in the background, the academia discovered this as a great new idea which could be further developed. And so when Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn developed the TCP/IP protocol, so in the 1970s and 1980s, this became an incredible tool for the academia. So what I have labeled it the second wave. And at this time, so nobody had a clue that this tool could be used also for business. Only with the invention of the World Wide Web, suddenly, people realized this could become a big business, with the World Wide Web and the e-commerce, which started in the 1990s. And then we did see the .com boom. And if business is there, it's not a big question that sooner or later policy will jump in. And so in the first years of the 2000, we did see that now policy discussion started around the internet. This was when ICANN was established, when the UN World Summit on the Information Society took place, and the Internet Governance Forum was established. So, but with the emergence of social networks and the smartphone, so this internet issue became really an issue for the whole society. This was not anymore only academia or business or policy. This was the whole society. And what we have now in the 2020s, it's part of a big geostrategic battle between China and the US, between Europe and Russia, and all what we see now around Ukraine is always, that cyber, digital is involved, and we are discussing now this against the background of a real war. We see the militarization of cyberspace, the arms race. We could say, welcome back to the history where all this started, but this would be easy. But anyhow, it's important in my eyes to have the history in the background to understand better what are the challenges of the future. And a lot of things have changed in the last 50 years. The next slide, please. Because in the 1990s, when the World Wide Web now opened the door that nearly everybody could have sooner or later access to the internet. The internet came as, let's say, a promise for world democracy and lasting peace. So the internet was seen as an enabler for global democracy, removing centralized power. We moved from network to hierarchies. So it was decentralization was the issue. So we changed top-down policy making into bottom-up policy making, inclusion, equality, transparency, freedom of expression, human rights. This was what the hope was with the internet in the 1990s and also in the year 2000. And by the way, up to date, we should not forget that the internet has a tremendous potential to promote democracy and freedom in the world. But today, you know, in the 2021, we see the internet also as a risk factor for world peace. There's an explosion of cybercrime, you know, fake news and hate speech pollute our intellectual environment. We see the militarization of cyberspace. So that means all these promises of the 1990s, you know, have now the backside, the bad side of the internet becomes also visible. And on the one hand, we could say in the 1990s, we have been naive to believe only that this has only, you know, the good things are there, but as we know, there is no sunshine without rain, and also there is no democracy, global democracy, without enemies of democracy. And insofar, probably today we have a full picture. So we are confronted with the full reality of a new society, which was called by the United Nations as the Information Society. So what has changed? Internet governance isn't anymore a technical problem with political implications. It's now a political problem with a technical component. So the internet, as any other instrument, can be used for the good and misused for the bad. And I think one important change is also visible, that the US, the United States of America, isn't anymore the only big player in cyberspace. So the internet was invented in the US. So until the 1990s and even in the year 2000, it was the American corporations, American organizations, and the American government which played the biggest role. But now we have also other players. So we live in a multipolar world and with big challenges, as we will see also in the next slide. Please, next slide. So some people have said, okay, we are back now in a Cold War. Cold War 2.0, it's a digital war. And you can compare it with the 1950s. So, and indeed, there are a number of similarities, but there are also a number of differences. And in this slide and the next slide, I will go through the similarities and the differences. Where I see the similarities. So we have to realize that we have indeed in our world two antagonistic systems. So we had in the 50s communism and capitalism. It was US versus the Soviet Union. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, there was probably the illusion that now we are all moved into a democratic world where everything is based on the acceptance of human rights and the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. So, but we have seen that also the information society, as the industrial society, has produced two totally different types of society. So what we have now is a democratic information society and an autocratic information society. So the Chinese Politburo member in the meeting with Blinken in March in 2021 in Alaska said, we have two types of democracy, the United States style democracy and the Chinese style democracy. So, and indeed, if you go deeper into the cyberspace of today, you see there is the US and European version, and there's the China and Russian version. And I think this is what we have to realize. So we have this democracy versus autocracy narrative now in cyberspace. We have also two controversial strategies. So in the 1950s, it was the communist world revolution versus the rollback strategy of the United Nations. So today we have China's digital Silk Road, and we have the so-called color revolutions, which is the concept of the West to bring democracies to autocratic regimes. So we have also an arms race. So in the 1950s, it was the nuclear arms race. Now we have arms race in cyberspace, you know, with autonomous weapon systems, killer robots. You see the drones are now in the Ukraine war. So all this is going on and is one of the similarities. And we have a tremendous mistrust. So in the 1950s, we had spies on both sides. So we had Rosenberg in the US and Gary Powers, who spied for the other side. And today we have the cookies and we have cyber attacks like SolarWinds on the one hand and Stuxnet on the other hand. Next slide. So, but there are also big differences between the 1950s and the 2020s. One is the openness. So in the 1950s, we had an Iron Curtain, but today we have open borders. So that's, you know, even if probably we will see no borders and new frontiers and another deep split like the Berlin Wall. So, but so far we have open borders. People can travel, information cross borders. So this is a big difference. The second point is we have, in the 50s, we have separate economies and embargoes. So now we have a rather interdependent world economy and global supply chains. Probably the Ukraine war now will bring additional difficulties. But so far in the 2020s, we have a global economy and we have global supply chains. And it would be a disaster if this would collapse. So, and also the strategy to solve problems was a difference. In the 1950s, people were fighting for national independence. So the anti-colonial liberation wars dominated policies. And today we have to manage global interdependence, climate change, pandemic, and all this, you know, push for a better understanding among different nations. These are the realities. So if you compare the 1950s with the 2020s, you see even in a geostrategic setting that we have this similarities and differences. So the next two slides will deal with the options we have now. And academics always use scenarios. So I have here two scenarios. One is the confrontational scenario. The other scenario is the best case scenario. This is more cooperation. So what are the elements of this worst case scenario? That we see really a full militarization of cyberspace and the digital arms race. So we see this already now with drones, killer robots, killer bees, and other things, what I mentioned just with the other slide, the autonomous weapon systems, but also, you know, other arms are, you know, part of this story. We will see a growing number of cyber attacks, probably below the red line of Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter, but with a potential of cascading effects and escalation risks. We see now the Ukraine war, you know, how close we come to a World War III. So I think this could be a part of a worst case. And we have these real and proxy wars, as we have now Russia, Ukraine, but we have also Iran, Israel, we have Armenia, Azerbaijan, where all these new weapons are tested. So I just saw a report from the GGE on laws in Geneva from early March, where, you know, one delegate argued, you know, the new arms are developed in the north and tested in the south. So that means this could become really part of a worst case scenario. Worst case scenario for the economy would be the decoupling of the global economy. So with all the sanctions we have now, so this is not doesn't benefit anybody. So even politically, it's needed to have some clear language and clear sanctions, but nobody will benefit really from it. So that means building a digital fortress, and attacks against supply chains are not in the interest of all sides. So everybody will have to pay a price. We will see in a worst case scenario a massive violation of human rights. So it starts with censorship, enabled by artificial intelligence, and ends with mass surveillance and face recognition, also enabled via artificial intelligence. We see the emergence of new blocs. A transatlantic partnership will strengthen on the one hand. Probably this will lead to a Trans-Asian partnership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization if Putin and Xi go closer together, and with the support of Iran and some other countries. So they could form a dangerous bloc. And probably in between, we will see the emergence of a digital non-aligned movement, which then says, you know, we do not want to get pulled into the conflict between China and the US and Russia and the European Union. And we could see the standardization wars on new internet protocols, on the 6G protocol, which would lead finally to a bifurcation of the internet. So this is the worst case scenario. What could be the best case scenario? The next slide. So this is that is related to all the proposals the Secretary General of the United Nations is pushing forward with his roadmap on digital cooperation. That means to develop the Internet Governance Forum as the main platform for discussion on internet governance, to have a leadership panel which would translate the great ideas from the IGF into political processes and negotiations among governments, the nomination of a tech envoy who would be the cyber czar of the United Nations, to have more parliamentarians involved in global discussions, not to harmonize internet national legislation on internet, but to make it more compatible, that you can more or less work, enhance cooperation also among the lawmakers around the globe. And all this can lead to a global digital compact, what the Secretary General of the United Nations wants to have as part of the future summit he will organize next year, and could lead to the WSIS +20 conference in 2025. So a part of the best case scenario would be also treaties to enhance cybersecurity. So the Secretary General is asking for a prohibition of all this autonomous weapon system, killer robots, attacks against critical infrastructure. So we have negotiations in the United Nations First Committee of the so-called open-ended working group, where we discuss confidence and capacity building measures, and also norms on state behavior in cyberspace. Just recently, negotiations started on a convention to fight cybercrime, because criminals, cybercrime is a different issue than the national security issue, which is negotiated in the open-ended working group. So we could have a global rule book for the digital economy. So we have just recently the agreement on digital tax in the framework of the OECD and the G20, which was a big step forward. So we negotiations are underway in the World Trade Organizations on free flow of data with trust, on digital trade or an e-commerce treaty, and we could reach some good progress for sustainable development to overcome the digital divide. What the UN has declared the decade of action, so that we reach the sustainable development goals until the year 2030. And we could find also a global framework with guidelines for artificial intelligence. Just recently, the UNESCO has adopted a great recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. The OECD has adopted recently guiding principles for AI, and the European Union and the Council of Europe are working on binding documents to frame the development of AI into a direction which would be based on the on human dignity, and put the human being into the center of the development of AI. And this would be also relevant for the management of critical internet resources, so that the technical internet governance, management of domain names, IP addresses, root servers remain out of the political conflicts and are not politicized, as some governments has proposed this also recently, to bring competences back from ICANN to the ITU. So this is the best case scenario. And here comes my last slide. So what is the way forward? My hope is that we will have more from the best case scenario than from the worst case scenario. The probability of a global hot cyber war, in my eyes, is low, but the cyber peace will be very cold. So what I expect is a mix of confrontation and cooperation. I'm too old to be naive that everything will be fine at the end of the day. So there will be conflicts, but you know, with the wisdom and the experience of the last 50 years, governments and non-state actors could be able to manage this in a way what Bill Clinton has described 10 years ago in an ICANN meeting in San Francisco as stumbling forward. No big jumps, no clarification until the very last point. That means if you stumble forward from issue to issue, you know, from year to year, this looks like not a perfect solution, but it's always better than if you have a shooting war. So this is not a very positive look forward, but it's a look forward what is probably close to realism, to find a good word which is neither pessimistic nor too optimistic. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wolfgang. A great start. Over to you, Olivier.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my slides. I have quite a number of them, and it's particularly hard to follow up on Wolfgang's amazing presentation, always very inspiring. I'm going to be speaking to you a little bit more about a bit more mundane matters, which is the internet governance actors that we have today and the multiplication of them. Wolfgang has alluded to quite a number of them, and I thought I'd just give a list, if you want, of what we have at the moment governing the internet. The internet model in itself is a very distributed system with a great number of actors dealing with different aspects of it, from the open standards development on one side to the education, capacity building, of course, the end users out there, and the organizations that actually run specific resources, such as the naming and addressing, which has to be unique, because if it's not unique, then you would end up with an absolute mess. The information wouldn't get where it would need to get to. This diagram was created by the Internet Society quite a number of years ago, more than 10 years ago, and I think it still fits well what the various organizations that are involved in the governing the internet. The other diagram, which I thought we'd start with, is also this layer diagram, which is it's a technical thing. It's a protocol stack, it's called. And I know that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't quite understand what the internet is made of, because when one speaks about the internet, some speak about the actual content, some speak about the infrastructure, some speak about the underlying principles of the internet. This stack here starts with the TCP/IP model, which is on the right-hand side, which is what the whole model that the layers are built on. At the bottom of the stack, what you have is the network interface. It's all the internet plumbing, the fibers, the satellites, the stuff that makes it come together. In the middle, in blue, the transport and internet layers are the TCP/IP part, which is what Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn invented in the early 70s. That is the common transport model for all of the computers to be able to talk to each other. And that's what actually makes the internet work, the fact that you're able to use that common transport model between them. And above that is the application layer, which is what effectively we've seen with Tim Berners-Lee inventing the World Wide Web, the presentation, the browsers, the applications that we run on our mobile phones, all of the stuff that is on the top. And these are all independent from each other. What's really cool is that the things that are higher up the stack can be very diverse and can all run on, as long as they're all able to run on the lower parts of the stack, then it's all compatible with each other, which is something that makes the internet very unique in itself. The internet in itself as a commercial network really started in the early 90s. Before that, we had the ARPANET, the military network, which Wolfgang alluded to. And it's only in 91 that commercial services started branching off, if you want, having a couple of companies, a few companies in the US start commercial services, having a national educational network, the NSF-Net, National Science Foundation Network, pushing to connect all of the universities in the United States. And that had acceptable use policies, so commercial traffic was not allowed on that. This is what pushed everything over to some commercial networks. And the rest of the world started connecting. So other countries started connecting and other internet service providers started connecting through what's called a peering agreement, which is you carry my traffic, I carry your traffic. In some cases, it was a simple exchange of money, basically. Oh yeah, well, you know, we'll connect you if you pay us X amount per year. But in many cases, and especially at country level, it was a case of carrying each other's traffic, which means that there's no overall owner of the internet. There's just a group of networks that are connected together across the world. So how do you know this? Well, it's not an easy task. And this is a diagram that was done a few years ago by Diplo in Geneva. They're really good at showing us really that the internet is something that's always in construction. It's always evolving, but there are just so many different aspects to it. Internet governance is like a whole thing that includes human rights and economic issues and development and cybersecurity, and of course all the legal and all the regulations that you see these days. And it's international with no overall control. So the various organizations that are in charge of a few parts of the internet, well, I thought we'd start with the Internet Society, which was there in the very early days. It was founded in the early 90s, and it was a nonprofit to push forward for the internet model and for more people to use the internet. You have to remember that in 1992, we were still dealing with text services. It's only in 93 and 94 that the World Wide Web, with Tim Berners-Lee use of the internet to be able to carry voice, video, data in a usable form, that things started becoming usable. But before that, when you talked about the internet, you were either a geek or someone very weird that was looking at just all the new stuff coming out. Oh, wait, yeah, that's pretty much like that. The Internet Society acted as the legal home to the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is the group that started building standards for the internet. It's got chapters around the world, but the two main things that it was supporting was the architecture board on one side and the task force that started with this thing called request for comments, that are effectively internet standards, and you're free to follow them or not. It's not a thing that you have to follow the standard. If you follow the standard, you'll be compatible with everyone else. If you don't follow the standard, it might be that it doesn't work. And this is the open nature of the internet, where you're not told you have to follow this or that, but if you do follow it, you have a better chance of being successful in what you're doing. that effectively, the IETF is effectively dealing with what's in blue here, you know, the TCP/IP, the IPv4, IPv6, all of this technical stuff that gets computers to talk to each other. Most of the work of the IETF is in this part of the model. ICANN is another organization that was contracted in the late 90s, in 1998, to run the domain name system. Now, the domain name system is effectively the names that you type in your browser or that you type in your email program to reach someone else. Because the internet in itself runs with IP numbers, and it's particularly difficult for humans to remember so many numbers. Names are much easier to use. And so this whole system was created in order to do some kind of a directory structure between names and numbers, where you don't have to remember the numbers and just type the names. The function was taken over by the US government, and the policy making in ICANN is multi-stakeholder, bottom-up, and consensus-based. So bottom-up means that basically there's not a boss in ICANN that says, this is what we're going to do next year. No, there is a community of people that work together that say, right, together we're going to work towards tomorrow's internet, and we're going to develop the policies all together. And it's multi-stakeholder. So the community is not just made up of technologists or made up of academics or of commercial people. It's actually a group of government, civil society, private sector, and academic community, end users, a lot of people that come together in a multi-stakeholder fashion where no one has the overall say over everyone else. The organization itself is private sector led, so it's not run by governments as such, and it's based in California, but the people that take part in this policy making are based all around the world. You're talking about domain names, so ICANN deals primarily just with the top level domains. The top level here, as you can see, is .org, but that can also be .uk for United Kingdom, .de for Germany, or also for Korea, it can be .kr, I believe. So that's what the different locations that you have around the world. The .uk and so on is country codes based, and those ones, the .org and .com and .net, are the generic names, as we call them. And so it deals with that. Now, of course, there needs to be a database of these so that when you type a domain name in your computer, then it actually gets to the right location. And this is what the root server system works on. Now, the root server system is like a pyramid where the main database holds only the details of all of the top level domains. And so when you type in your browser, the first thing that is asked is, okay, what is the top level domain? And then it sends you to the right server, so for it to actually be able to have that part of the answer, the translation between your domain name and the IP address. You have to remember, this is a network that evolves at an amazing rate, really, really fast. Prior to the system, there was one person who was adding new domains and new names to the database. But when the DNS, the domain name system, was introduced, that was a distributed system so that everyone could take care of their own part of the network. Now, at the start, there were 13 name servers around the world. And as you can see, they were primarily based in the United States. These days, there are some all over the place. There are 1,525 instances of root servers. There might be one close to you. And the reason for this, of course, is that it's got to be resilient. This is a worldwide network. And if you have an outage somewhere, it shouldn't affect everyone else. So the fact you have so many of these name servers involved means that you have a very, very stable system indeed. When it comes down to the distribution of IP addresses, you know, the numbers that you need to connect your computer to the internet, we have this thing called regional internet registries. There are 5 of them. They're based around the world. They each serve a specific region. So ICANN has got the master database, and then it just gets distributed over to the different regions. And each region deals with the end users and the end organizations that want to register and make up new networks. When you need to build a new network and you require IP addresses, well, in the Asian region, you would need to go to APNIC, and they would allocate, provided you provide them with details of what you want to do, they would allocate the required number of IP addresses for you to be able to build your network. The World Wide Web's consortium, as I mentioned a bit earlier, is an organization that was started by Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who invented the World Wide Web, the whole browser, the whole thing of being able to surf through things. And so they deal primarily just with the application layer and the development of HTML, which is the language that was used for the web. And of course, you know, with the new technologies that are out there, there's always new things coming out. And these days, there are a lot of concerns with regards to security. So the World Wide Web Consortium is doing a lot of work also on that to come up with updated versions of HTML that provide better security for users and for people around the world. You'll see in that application layer that there's also this thing of compression and encryption protocols. Well, who speaks about security often speaks about encryption these days, but it's a double-edged sword in some way, because whilst encryption on the one hand brings better security through less hacking, on the other side there are some governments that see encryption as being a problem because they're not able to see what's going on the internet, and they would prefer traffic to be unencrypted. And that's one of the big battles that we've seen. I think that Wolfgang somehow alluded to as well in this. It's often a political battle. The ITU is one of the organizations that was there way before the internet. It was created in 1865 for a telegraph and telephone service back then, but it's been very much involved with originally all of the plumbing side of the internet, all of those regulations that are required for connecting cables, etc. They kind of missed the internet wave in the early 90s, but they have been involved in some work to continue to be involved in telecommunications and ICT development around the world. You can see that they've got a whole radio spectrum side of it. ITUR, extremely important for radio frequencies, especially these days when most of the traditional radio services are being shut down and the spectrum is being liberated so as to be able to use more mobile phone and faster speeds of transmission with the 5G, well, 4G, then 5G, and then we'll see 6G, etc. in the future. There's the technical field as well that's got the World Telecommunication Standardization Assembly and the Telecommunication Standardization Advisory Group. And then there's the ITU development stage, which is the World Telecommunication Development Conference. And I'm going to touch onto these a little bit because these are quite important meetings that take place yearly. First, the World Conference on International Telecommunications, the last one of which was 10 years ago, which was a conference to update the international telecom regulations. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for some, and unfortunately for others, depending on which side you look at things, they didn't manage to reach consensus on this. You have to remember, this is an organization where the members are states. They're not just, they're not private sector and end users. You're dealing here with countries, and there's a lot of politics that goes on in there. And for many countries, the internet is this network that is pretty much outside this global political sphere and has to remain outside the global political sphere, whilst for others, they needed to have regulations that would be following the traditional way of nation states running their show effectively. And so that thing didn't work out. In 2013, they tried another more calmer discussion to try and see if some of the regulations could be adopted somehow through the World Telecommunication Policy Forum. And the last one that took place in Geneva, which was kind of a hybrid meeting, was the WTPF 21 in December 2021. And you have to remember, we had COVID in between, so a lot of work that was supposed to happen hasn't. And so things have been slowed down a little bit. There's also the World Telecommunication Development Conference, the last one of which took place in 2017. The next one is going to happen this year. The whole situation that's happened recently has kind of muddied the waters a little bit. We've always had in ITU processes a block that was led by the West, and we're speaking here Western Europe and the United States, and another bloc that was led by either China or Russia, where there were very different views as to the future of ICTs. And it's interesting because now this latest physical confrontation that has happened in Ukraine seems to have thrown a spanner in the works, because one, of course, all of these conferences work with influences and spheres of influence, and one really doesn't know how the sphere of influence has shifted with the latest developments. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these more mundane discussions about telecommunications are affected by the political and the wars that are currently taking place outside. The planetary conference, that's the big meeting that the ITU has every 4 years. And the next one is also going to take place pretty close to the action in October 2022 in Romania. So that's going to be an interesting one to see. I don't know whether it will proceed forward or whether it will be moved ahead or backwards or delayed. Big question, but that's what's coming up soon on that. And then, of course, there's United Nations processes, which Wolfgang has mentioned, the Internet Governance Forum being particularly important, but you can see a number of agencies that are involved in internet governance, development, and spreading the word, getting more people connected. We still have billions of people that are not connected to the internet, as in no connection whatsoever. And that's just amazing in our world these days, but it's still a reality. The Tunis agenda, which was the one that started out this whole concept of internet governance as such, was reviewed after 10 years, the World Summit on Information Systems, the WSIS, and of course, that was 2005, 2015. We are going to be reaching to 2025, WSIS plus 20. Who knows what the world will be like at that point. And then the Internet Governance Forum needs to be mentioned because it's a truly multi-stakeholder discussion forum that is actually evolving now. It started out as a talk shop, as one would say, but where a lot of the discussions that then led to decision being made later on somewhere else started. It's kind of the birthplace of some of those discussions here and then went on somewhere else. But now that it's evolving, it is looking at actually having concrete outcomes as well, and perhaps even recommendations then for the internet to continue to evolve, with people from all around the world coming together and discussing the issues. There are not only global IGFs, but there are also national and regional internet governance fora. And that's really amazing, because what you have is people that meet locally that are then able to come up with some suggestions that then move up to the region and then to the global internet governance forum. And that really is a truly bottom-up, multi-stakeholder, distributed way of governing the internet. And I really personally hope that things will work out well and will continue to evolve in this way. Finally, one last thing is this whole discussion that we hear these days in Europe and elsewhere as well about regulation. The internet needs to be regulated. It's completely unregulated. Well, I hope that I've provided you with some information about how much of the regulation is actually taking place there. But it is worth noting that when one speaks of regulation, I think that often many people just speak of the content side of things, and that really is what you see in the top part, the application layer, where some are saying, well, hate speech and terrorist content and all that needs to be regulated. And that's not really regulating the internet. It's just regulating a use of the internet. And certainly there are lots and lots of discussions to be had in that. So thank you, and I hope that this has been helpful. And sorry for going so fast, but this is the way that we usually go. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. You covered an immense amount of ground, both of you. Terrific presentations. I think we have time for a little bit of conversation. Will you lead us off, Pari?
Well, I want to start by thanking both presenters. They painted a brilliant picture of what is happening, what has happened in past, what a complex system we have. But right now, a very passionate discussion is taking place about what is happening in Ukraine and what role Internet Foundation could play, various institutions. So I want to start with you, Olivier. Is it even possible, because we know that Ukraine requested from ICANN to remove the top-level domain for Russia. Is it even possible? We discuss whether it's a good idea or not, but is it possible technically?
So, technically, of course, anything is possible, because at the end of the day, we're just dealing with a database, and the root that I mentioned is a database with all of the top-level domains on there. However, there are some complexities to it in that it's only by consensus that what we call the A root, the master database, is actually being followed by everyone. And it's very easy to say, well, actually, I'm not going to use the master database. I'm going to change my name servers to follow another route, to follow another master database. And so if you then look at thinking, well, let's just take the Russian top-level domain .ru out of the master database, what effect would that have? Well, for those countries that wish to follow this, of course, that would take .ru out of the database that they follow. For those countries that don't wish to follow this, they might decide to follow an alternative route that will still contain the .ru top-level domain. And the only thing we will achieve with that is fragmentation, is ending up with more than one route, ending up with a network that will start fragmenting because the system by which we, not the dictionary, but the translation by which we have the names and the IP addresses will actually not be the same anymore. They'll start going in different directions. So maybe an idea when you think of it, oh yeah, let's take them all offline. But in reality, in a matter of hours, they'll be back on, and it won't have any other thing than to just break the internet. Well, break it as in not have it as a single network anymore.
Thank you. And Wolfgang, what is your position? Actually, regardless of technical issues, what do you think is a foundation like ICANN or Internet Foundation? Should they get involved in geopolitical discussions such as this?
I fully understand the intentions of the Vice Minister from Ukraine, but this doesn't work as Olivier has said. So that means you should not beat the horse if the horseman is riding in the wrong direction. So the horseman is sitting on this horse, but you have to be very careful if you try to do something in this field, because the internet and let's say the technical resources are like air, and if you compare it with the real world, there is no Chinese air, there is no American air. So you have polluted or unpolluted air. And when you start to, do some things with the public core of the internet, which includes the domain name system, IP addresses, root server, then you pollute the system. And this fires back to everybody. So it makes no sense. If you poison the water you have to drink, then you will die. So, there is a need to do something, but I think this was the good part of many good parts in Olivier's presentation, but he had this as a layered system. And if you want to do something, go to the upper layer and do not pollute the lower layer. So the lower layer has to be and should be neutral. So because this is like air, and by the way, if you read the letter from the minister from Ukraine, it's not consistent. What about the Russian GTLDs, .Moskva or .Skolkovo? So they have a number of GTLDs which are also in Russian. What about the hundreds of thousands registrations of Russians under .com and other generic top-level domains? That means if you want to punish Russia and all the 100 million Russian internet users, so to try it via this technical resources is the wrong U-turn. So this does not mean that ICANN should be neutral. And I think what ICANN did now, and to say, okay, we keep the internet critical resources as neutral as possible, but we will help the Ukrainian civil society and, provide $1 million then for rebuild networks or for training, capacity building, or what else. And in my eyes, it would make also sense to help the Russian civil society, because what I have heard, from a lot of good colleagues we have in the ICANN community, in the ISA community, in ASA. So there are so many nice and good Russian guys, and we have cooperated with these Russian guys who probably say, this is totally stupid. This is Putin's war and not the war of the Russian internet community. So, and they have now a difficult time within Russia, and we should help our Russian friends also, to build some bridges and not to burn the bridges.
Thank you very much. That was very enlightening. Greg, I'd like now to turn to you. And is there any lessons we can have from space policies, from nuclear policies that we can learn and apply it here, or are they very different?
I think they're different in many respects, but certainly some of the things, the importance, as both of our present presenters have stressed, of continuing to talk, continuing to keep those links, continuing to make it possible to communicate. I think that's the essence of both. It was even during the first Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union did communicate, did work out some rules of the road, did do some arms control. So it seems to me in that sense, there is some analogy back to the Cold War and nuclear issues. It's not an exact analogy, but it does, I think, at least stress the importance of continuing to talk, to continue to think about rules of the road, continuing to think about confidence building measures, as we called them in those days. This seems like a time when those are particularly welcome, as I think both Olivier and Wolfgang have stressed. We need to make sure that we keep open the possibilities of conversation. I think that's the lesson I would draw from the Cold War.
I see some similarities with the supply chain, because there also we want to keep the core intact. Do you see any sanctions we can apply here in terms of internet? And do you see any similarities to supply?
I think the sanctions are difficult for me to draw as analogies in the internet world. I appreciate Wolfgang's emphasis on help rather than sanctions. I think in some sense carrots almost always work better than sticks. And as he's stressed, and both he and Olivier have stressed, it's very difficult to do the kinds of things you might like to do, even technically. And there's always, George Kennan said many long years ago about dealing with the communists, he said the difficult part of dealing with communist countries, and I think it stands for all countries, is that you can't hurt the government without hurting the people, and you can't help the people without helping the government. And that, I think, is the dilemma we all face in trying to put pressure on Russia to stop this terrible killing.
Wolfgang, there are two models of internet governance. One is multi-stakeholder model, and the other one is multilateral. How do you compare them, and how do you see what road we need to take forward?
I never saw this as a contradiction, because we have, on the one hand, this one world, one internet, which is managed by the multi-stakeholder community. But we have also the system of the United Nations with one internet and 193 national jurisdictions. So these are, I think, two different legs, two different shoes, but this is the world as we know. And you have probably, it would be an illusion to expect that the one world, one internet will become the guideline or the framework for the 193 jurisdictions, which would mean a harmonization of 193 national jurisdictions. But it's also a risk and would be very counterproductive to stretch the 193 national jurisdiction model to the one world, one internet model. So what the Russians partly proposed in the wicket in Dubai, when they introduced the concept of the national internet segment, that means means to reborder the borderless cyberspace, which makes no sense and would undermine all the positive elements we have earned from the internet in the last 50 years. So the reality is that the intergovernmental system as the United Nations is embedded in a multi-stakeholder environment. And on the other hand, the multi-stakeholder community has also its limits if it comes to concrete decisions. So that means Olivier has made very clear all is consensus-based, bottom up, and so on. You have some possibilities to manage a number of issues, like the managing domain name system, IP addresses. But there are some issues where you need really, let's say, legally binding arrangements. And insofar, the non-state actors are not a subject under international law. That means if you want to have hard law, so this can be done only in a very limited way by the multi-stakeholder community. So insofar, this has to go hand in hand. So that means the multi-stakeholder community should identify the issues where they need multilateral arrangements, if needed, if it's possible. So on the other hand, governments have to understand they are not the only band in town. They operate in a multi-stakeholder environment, and they have to talk before they make decisions to the other stakeholders. Insofar, the IGF is a very, very good place where governments should go, should listen, and then go to the negotiation place and to say, okay, we have heard from the private sector, we have heard from the civil society. This was the recommendation of the technical community. In the light of all the wisdom which comes from the different perspectives, then they are better qualified to make decisions in the sphere where governments have to act. But the world is bigger than only, action fields for governments.
Thank you. Thank you. Olivier, Internet was developed originally in United States, where the free market is the prominent ideology. I fear that increasingly the internet architecture favor authoritarian systems with big data. What is your take on that?
It's interesting because often one talks about the US internet as being imperialist in some way, in that it's companies that will try and collect absolutely every information that they can about you and then use it to colonize you in some way. And it's funny because you do have, there are some aspects of winner takes all in the internet model, in the startup model, where the early movers were the ones that are now the big globals, the Googles, the GAFAs, if you want, of this world, that seem to be able to purchase anything that they have out there. They have a budget that is larger than the budget, than the GDP of many countries around the world. And you think, like, goodness, how strong are they going to be? We are now, I think, in a situation where, whilst in the past many governments were not really up to date or aware of how things worked. And I'm speaking here not just the government, but people themselves that were working in government were not so well educated about what the internet was about. We have now seen some great strides in many civil servants and many organizations, so government departments and so on around. And I've certainly noticed over the years that whilst 15, 20 years ago, Europe was pretty much overtaken by what was going on, all these new services that were being rolled out across Europe by these American corporations. You can see now that there's a lot more going on with regards to regulation that is being put together. There's a whole thing about taxation that is coming up. And it's something which, funnily enough, originally was raised in Europe as in, well, there's taxation issues, we need to tax those companies. And in the US, there was a big pushback towards taxation of these companies. And nowadays, I guess it's down to the global discussions that are taking place. There is an understanding that, yeah, we need to find something that's a little bit more, that levels the playing field more than what we've had so far, where some companies had such advantages because of the fact that they were so huge. They could actually skirt local laws, they could pay less tax than a company that had a 10th or 100th of its income, just because they were playing some clever tricks and so on. So we are seeing a definite shift in things, and a definite shift that will open new opportunities throughout the world, I think, for other corporations as well. The only concern that I do have is that there still appears to be some hesitation with regards to these global firms, to basically get them to open up the market for others. What I mean by that is they are so big, they are somehow their own enemies, in that, yes, they are huge, they will be fined here and there, but the fines that are levied against them are usually quite insignificant when you look at the actual budget of these corporations.
Yeah.
So they're large enough to say, well, we'll do this, we'll get fined, but that's okay. That will be within the budget. And if it's less than X number of billions, we're fine, we're cool. It's better than if we had to follow the rules completely. At the same time, these companies want to continue growing. And of course, they, in response, often say, well, you know what, you want to fine us, but we want to provide more jobs for people in your country, and we're going to open an office in your country, and we'll employ, well, what shall we say, 5,000-10,000 people? And there we are dealing with absolutely incredible numbers that makes these corporations so powerful, not because they're nasty or anything like that, but because they command such a weight, and they're able to actually develop places so well by opening an office in a place that it's difficult to be tough with them, and at the same time to be friends with them, so as for them to help with the development locally. So it's a complex system yet again. And I just see that it will take time for more actors to come in the picture, and for perhaps maybe less of a concentration of powers, because GAFA at the moment is what, GAFA, and then maybe 5 companies. If we have more than that, it will probably be more equitable. And we are seeing more and more unicorns come from around the world. In Asia, we're seeing many companies that are becoming absolutely huge, and that are also tipping the balance, so that we've got a bit more of an equilibrium, more of a balance throughout the world, than have something that's so just heavily US influenced.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We are running out of time. Otherwise, there's so many questions, and I really wanted to hear Greg's point of view, because I know he has a lot to say about private sector, and also Wolfgang's, but we are running out of time. So I want to thank you, everyone, and leave it to Greg for closing remarks.
Let me just add to part of the thanks. This has been a great start. It's really a terrific beginning. Lots to draw on and lots of things to talk about. So special thanks to both you, Wolfgang and Olivier, for getting us off to such a very good start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I wish you a good conference. Bye-bye, and hope to see you next in Seoul in Korea.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.